Itch it up, my selector.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
I know you're gonna dig this.
Happy Saturday morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. This is Maestro Amilcar, and I'm here with one of my favorite guys to talk boxing with. This is a Saturday edition of Sucker Punch, and of course, that means that it's Ringside Reporter Live himself, Mr. Joe Habib. We're here to talk the light heavyweight division. Joe and I are both very excited about what's going to be taking place during the month of February. We've got two big fights. Unquestionably, we've got the top two light heavyweights in the world. Of course, we have Artur Beterbiev taking on Dimitri Bivol in a rematch of a highly anticipated fight that took place last year in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. All right, it's for the undisputed light heavyweight championship at 175 pounds, of course. And right before that, earlier in the month, we've got arguably number 3 versus number 4, David Benavidez, the interim WBC champion at 175, taking on David Morrell Jr., the regular WBA champion at 175 pounds, which would lead you to believe, right, Joe, that this is like a 4-man tourney, right? And if boxing worked the way we'd all like it to work, we would see the winner fighting the winner. So the question is, will the winner fight the winner? Joe, you take it from there. How's it going, first of all? Let the people know. And what are your thoughts on these fights? You're on mute, I think.
Great, man. I mean, we're being led to believe, and David Benavidez has kind of hinted around that. And he said when he moved up to light heavyweight, he needed a fight or two before he jumped into the championship mix here with these two guys. And so he had one fight already, and now he's having the other fight with David Morrell. So again, we have to look at PBC's track record, right? We have to look at how they moved and how they moved in the past and how they have continued to move, how they navigate their fighters. And we see it with Tank Davis. And we've actually seen it with David Benavidez for a large portion of his career, where they like to slow play these guys. And outside of Caleb Plant, David Benavidez doesn't have any really big names at super middleweight. He has the Anthony Jarrell fight, but again, that was after Anthony Jarrell was a little bit faded, right? And he was obviously past his prime. And David Lemieux, he was a guy moving up and arguably past his prime as well. So now we're seeing this fight with Morrell. We saw the fight with Plant. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction. And maybe this is a positive sign and an indication that maybe he will fight the winner of Beterbiev Bivol. But here's another caveat that we have to throw out there. And this is Al Heyman always being reluctant in most situations to work with other promoters and other broadcasters. So he has this deal with Amazon Prime, right? And these other two men fight on ESPN Plus is Beterbiev, and Bivol fights on DAZN. And Beterbiev fought on DAZN with this first fight with Bivol. So moving forward, there's a lot of moving parts. And when you look at the business aspect of trying to get David Benavidez or David Morrell in there with the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, how does that come to fruition with all of the backdoor politics and also the deal that Al Heyman has with Prime? What does that entail? Can they do cross promotions? I'm sure DAZN and Amazon Prime could try to work something out. They could sit down at the table and try to work out something. I think, wasn't there a fight where we wasn't there a pay per view where we were able to watch it on Amazon Prime and DAZN at the same time, or is that
No, you're absolutely right. I was actually out in Las Vegas for the fight you're talking about. That was the Ryan Garcia Tank Davis fight.
No, but that wasn't that was that a Showtime pay per view or was that an
Sorry,
Amazon
sorry,
Prime?
that was Showtime pay-per-view
So
with the zone.
so we still haven't. I'm trying to think. Have we ever seen a co-promotion from
Not in the
Prime?
United States.
Not so we haven't seen that yet, right?
No,
So,
not in the United States.
so that's going to be a problem because we don't know David Benavidez' situation. Obviously with Al Heyman, these fighters are, from what I understand, most of them are on fight to fight uh, contracts, basically. So there's no multi-fight deal with a lot of these guys. I know Canelo in the past signed like a 2-fight, 3-fight deal with PBC, but now it appears as though he's fight to fight. And from what I understand, David Benavidez is also fight to fight. So there's going to be a lot of red tape behind the scenes. There's going to be some obstacles, it appears, to have to hurdle and go around and go of the deal that PBC has with Amazon Prime. And we've heard in the past Samson saying, "Oh, well, if David's going to fight Canelo, then it has to be with PBC." And well, now that's that was taken care of, and the fight still didn't happen, right? So even with fighters being on the same side of the street, it doesn't guarantee that the fight's going to happen. But I do think that there is some issues with the winners of both of these fights fighting each other, and I am highly skeptical on whether or not it's going to happen because of the network deals and because of Al Heyman's past and how they've operated, and they've been very reluctant to do these cross promotions or these co-promotions or even let their fighters cross the street. So this isn't David Benavidez and David Morrell's court, right? I have a sense that if David Morrell were to win this fight, I don't think he'd have any problem just saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm going over there on DAZN. I'll fight the winner."
Well,
David,
I would agree with that. Really quick to interject and then take it from here, Joe.
yeah, David Benavidez not so much.
When two things. Number one, I do remember David Benavidez tweeting at Turki Al-Sheikh trying to get him to work on a Canelo fight. I don't know if you remember that. I'm pretty sure that happened.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I was actually out in LA this summer for the Crawford Madrimov card. And you know who was fighting on that Riyadh season LA card?
Who's that?
David Morrell Jr.
David Morrell was there, yeah.
Right? So I think that there can be some kind of arrangement figured out, don't you think?
Well, the only problem is I go back to the history.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen to Samson. And again, Samson doesn't have the leverage, and he's obviously not the main guy over there. It's all going to come down to Al Heyman. But ultimately, it still comes down to the fighter because they're the guy that signs the contract at the end of the day. They're the last signature on the contract, right?
Yeah.
So I just have to look at how David Benavidez has moved in the past, and he's always kind of parroted Samson's talking points, saying, "Oh, if I'm going to fight Canelo, it's got to be on PBC. It's got to be on PBC. It's got to be on PBC." So now is that same mentality and the same talking point going to be used moving forward if he wins against Morrell and then it gets posed and it gets presented to him that, you will give you the winner of this fight, how adamant is he going to be about having to have that fight be on his side of the street? Or will there be a co-promotion? Because if I'm David Benavidez, at record, so to speak, right? So
So Samson, just for the record, he is a licensed promoter in the United
yeah,
States. If you do go on BoxRec, you do see his promotional. Do you see his promotional company listed as the promoter of the event?
he's listed as a promoter on a lot of these events,
Right,
alongside of Tom Brown.
right. Tom Brown, of course. So the question is, because we do have something called the Muhammad Ali Act here in the United States, you're not allowed to be a promoter and a manager at the same time. I don't know if there's anything preventing people from being broadcasters and promoters at the same time. I don't really think so. So the question is, the PBC is not officially a promoter. I always kind of look at them on paper, I guess, as more of a PR agency, right? You can't really call
Yeah.
them a sports management or maybe a sports management company.
Mhm.
The question is, does Samson have any exclusive broadcast deals with it?
No,
No.
no,
So if David Benavidez decides to Samson as his promoter, and Samson doesn't have any promotional broadcast deals in place with any specific broadcaster, then I don't see any reason why David Benavidez can't fight on whatever network he wants. Or am I missing something in this equation?
Yeah, you make a great point, because if it all comes down to who has the broadcast deal, right? So can Samson block a fight? It's hard to imagine that being the case, because if David doesn't fight, Samson doesn't get paid either. So does Samson at the end of the day, like, he's going to have to get his percentage of David's whatever, a part of his purse, regardless of where and who he fights. So that can't be circumvented, right? So that's something that he can't get away from. But what it all boils down to is how much power not only power, but how much influence does Samson have over David? Because again, he seems to go along with everything Samson says. He's like, they don't really go off script. It's not like Tank, when Tank was with Mayweather Promotions. He would kind of push back against Floyd. He would not always agree with the career path that Floyd had set for him, and there would be a little bit of uh, back and forth between the two. You don't see that with David and Samson. It's like, you don't see that, like, even with like Big Baby Miller and Salida Promotions. Like there's a friction there. There's always been some sort of dispute between, the fighter and the promoter in that instance, right? But with here, David seems to go along with everything Samson says, and he has a lot of trust and confidence in him. So I just have a problem with Samson being in David's ear, saying to David, if you're a bigger name than either one of these guys. No one knows who these guys are in America. If they want to fight you, they have to come over, and it has to be on Amazon Prime. I hope that's not the case, but I can't not think that could be a potential roadblock to the fight being made, and that is in the back of my mind. I can't just disregard that. But but that's where David has to say, what am I going to do here? Like, am I just going to continue to fight fighters and not get a title shot? Like, how long do you want to wait, David, before you put yourself in a title shot? Because they have all the belts. So the winner of that fight, you're going to have to fight if you want to become a champion. There's no other way. Like, the titles aren't divided. So it's not like with PBC, how you could have picked up a stray title here, a stray title there. Just like at 168, once you got stripped and Canelo picked up your belt and then he became undisputed, all roads led to Canelo. Or all roads are going to lead to the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol. So how much and how many options do you have at light heavyweight if you don't fight the winner of this fight?
I want
Right?
to play something for you, Joe, and I want you to give this some context. This is actually on H Money's channel, but he took it actually from your channel. He created a short here from this. I want to play for it. Play this for everybody, and I want you to give this some context. Here we go. Oh, pull this up the right way. Sorry.
But I tell you one thing,
If Russia he walk away from Ukraine, David Benavidez he will fight Bivol.
So you would welcome that fight
Oh
with
yes.
Bivol.
But I tell you one thing: if Russia he walk away from Ukraine, David Benavidez he will fight Bivol.
So yes, again, that was from your channel. It was a specific quote there. And look, we're not going to get political about this, but I I I just hear that as that he's not going to fight Bivol because the conditioning he put on that, I mean, that's never going to happen. So is he? I
Well,
mean, what is he saying? What can you explain that?
supposedly the way he puts it, he has like his contract with David
What does that mean?
Benavidez.
If Russia walks away from the Ukraine, then Benavidez will fight Bivol? I mean,
Well,
well,
well, again, that already tells you and sets the tone that everything's got to be the way he wants it, and he's going to continue to be in David's ear and advise David. And the more requirements that you put out there, the more stipulations that you put out there when you're trying to make a fight, obviously the harder it's going to be to make that fight. And you already saw that was just a little taste of it right there, and how the negotiations would go if David were to win that fight. With Morrell, I'm not worried about that because, as you said, Morrell was already on a Riyadh undercard. David hasn't. David Benavidez wasn't on a Riyadh undercard, right? Virgil Ortiz, not to switch topics,
yeah.
but he's getting ready to be on on an undercard, right? And he has no problem doing that. Do you think? I mean, David Benavidez was on a Tank undercard, but that was because it was a PBC show. Do you think that Sampson would ever, be on board with David being on an undercard of a Riyadh season card, like David Morrell was able to do, and he
I
was
don't
able
know. I
to
mean, he
agree
was
to?
on the undercard of a Tank Davis Frank Martin fight.
Well, that you hear what I just said prior
Yeah,
to that?
I did. I'm just doubling down on it.
Yeah, so he'll be an undercard if it's a PBC show. Will he be on an undercard
You know,
if it's not a
I wanna
PBC show?
I wanna play you another clip if that's okay, and then I'd like you
Sure,
to comment
keep going.
because I want your opinion on the various challenges that David Benavidez has had in terms of making big fights. Look, I know you're a fan of David Benavidez. I'm a fan of David Benavidez. I've met
Sure.
David Benavidez, great guy in person. His father, I've had a very cordial conversations with. I'll give an example of how nice a guy David Benavidez is. He was in a media scrum, right? And one of the guys in the media scrum dropped his equipment, and David Benavidez actually picked up the guy's equipment, gave it back to him, and then gave that guy more time afterwards in a in a one-on-one. He's a very nice guy, but he hasn't been able to get big fights against marquee names at 168, other than Caleb Plant. And I want to play you another thing here, and I'd like you to comment on this and give your thoughts. Here we go.
Morrell, we have a contract that if he can victorious, he will fight Benavidez in May or June.
Oh wow! Did you just drop the big news on us?
Well, I believe so. Yes, he's supposed to win this fight. That's a tough fight next week. And if he wins that fight, most likely we will fight with David Benavidez in May or June.
Wow, that's huge.
And that is a fact. Well, with David.
So you heard that, right, Joe?
I most certainly did, yeah.
And by the way, when he was talking about May or June, that was 2023. So what's taking so long for this Benavidez-Morell fight to come to fruition? I mean, it's taking place in 2025.
I hate to be the skeptic, but I'm just going to put it out there, and people can agree or disagree with it. You saw how Morrell looked in his last fight,
Yeah.
right? He didn't look bad, but it didn't look like his normal spectacular self, right? Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Do you think that's why they want the fight now? Could that be a contributing factor to all of a sudden we want this fight now? Did it have to take for Morrell to not look so spectacular, for him to look, I don't want to say ordinary, but not as dynamic as he normally looks? Was that something that, had to be there for them to get this fight done and persuade them into taking this fight? That's what you have to ask yourself. I believe it was a factor, right? Because you could have fought this guy at any time. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
Here's the thing.
and that was when they were at 168, Joe. That's when they both held those kind of secondary titles at 168. They couldn't get fights with Canelo, either of them, right? So it was a natural fight to make.
Yeah.
But instead of going to Morrell Jr., then what did he do? He went to Caleb Plant, right?
Yeah.
Then after Caleb Plant, he went to Boo Boo Andrade, right? Then after Boo Boo Andrade, he moved up to 175 for whatever reason and turned on and faced Daniil Gvozdyk. So that comment was 3 fights ago.
And here's the counter argument, right? If you're a Benavidez fan or you're on the Benavidez side of the argument, well, how much experience does Morrell have? How many fights does he have? Who has he fought? But here's the problem with all that. It's hard when you look at Morrell. And again, this is a subjective statement and it's a subjective viewpoint. And a lot of people disagree with this viewpoint. But sometimes you look at a fighter and they just overwhelmingly pass the eye test. Like David Morrell passes the eye test. Like there's something, when you watch that guy fight, there's something that just is like, wow, this guy is dynamic. This guy is good. This guy, there's something there. Right? When you look at this guy. And obviously the resume matters a lot, but you see how he's just dispatching the guys he's fighting who are not great fighters, but they're solid fighters. They're decent fighters, right? And you're just seeing how he's handling them. And you're just looking at just the skill set when you watch this guy fight. And you say to yourself, there's something there. But if you're a fighter, and you're looking at it and you're saying, yeah, this guy looks like he can scrap a little bit, but he's not a huge name, doesn't have that many fights. What can this guy really do for me, right? So he's not always necessarily going to be a first option, not only for David Benavidez, but for anybody. Let's face it, Canelo Alvarez he was a mandatory in the WBA, and they somehow found a way to make Berlanga the mandatory to circumvent this guy. So
I never understood that.
And they try to pacify what these sanctioning bodies like to do, and I've criticized them a lot for it. They pacify certain fighters by giving them an interim belt to say, okay, well, we're not going to actually give you the real title, but we'll give you the interim title to pacify you for a little bit of time
while collecting fees.
So we can collect fees from you, and then we can move our guy in there that we want to fight for the title, right? It's almost like politics when you have these politicians who are slaves to the donors. The sanctioning bodies are kind of slaves, right, to the money fighters. And you got a guy like Canelo, he's going to have a little bit of influence on a guy like Mauricio Suleiman, because obviously when he fights, that 3% is a big 3%.
Huge 3%.
It's a huge 3%, right? So obviously we know how these sanctioning bodies work, and we know there's a lot of underlying things going on behind the scenes in why they do what they do. We know that. So that's why David Morrell was ranked so high in the WBA, and eventually, instead of giving him a shot at the real title, they gave him a shot at the regular title, and they just kind of string you along, and keep promising you're going to get a bite at the apple. But just like David Benavidez, both of these guys had to go up to 175 in order to position themselves for a title fight. So the winner of this fight between Morrell and Benavidez, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, will be a mandatory in one of the organizations, right? The winner of this fight will be positioned to be a mandatory in one of the organizations. But the question will still remain, will that mandatory be ordered? Now, Bivol and Beterbiev don't have that same leverage over the sanctioning bodies that Canelo does. They're not bringing the revenue that Canelo brings. They're not getting paid what Canelo's getting paid. So that's a bright spot. But again, I repeat, not to sound redundant, that caveat is always going to be Samson Lukowitz, right? And he doesn't have the TV deal, right? He doesn't have the influence that an Al Heyman has, right? Or the power that Al Heyman has. But here's what he does have. He's got David Benavidez' ear. And he's had David Benavidez' ear since David Benavidez was a young man. So
here's my question.
That's a problem for me.
Well, I mean, you literally interviewed him and he's told you things that ended up just clearly being not true. But here's my question, because it kind of speaks to the broader issue with the PBC, right? We didn't see that many shows from the PBC in 2024. I counted 4 cards, and I counted how many of those 4 cards were not pay-per-view. I think one of them was not pay-per-view. The Tim Tszyu card.
Yeah.
And you could argue that the Tim Tszyu card wasn't pay-per-view because it was generating money for them for the fighters in Australia, right? So what were the other cards? Well, there was the Tim Tszyu fight against Fundora in Vegas. We saw how that one ended for Tim. Well, not the greatest year for Tim Tszyu, obviously. That was followed by what would have been the next one? Was it the Canelo fight? Right, the Canelo fight.
Yeah.
In May, right, against Munguia, right? Then that was followed by David Morrell Jr. against Andrade on the undercard of Frank Martin and Tank Davis. So that was 3. So we're at 3 pay-per-views right now. Oh, there was another pay-per-view. It was Canelo versus Berlanga. So that's 4 cards. And then the Tim Tszyu Murtazaliev, that was 5. So 5 cards total in 12 months. That's less than 1 card every 2 months. And 4 of the 5 were pay-per-views, right? What's the future of the PBC right now, and how do these 2 fighters, Morrell Jr. and Benavidez, fit into that picture, Joe?
Well, that's a phenomenal point, and David has to ask himself these same questions moving forward, because here's what you have to look at. You got Top Rank, who's prepared to sign a deal with DAZN. They're not going to give them the exclusivity. They're going to want to be able to work with other broadcasters as well. They've already made that clear, but they do want to sign and they have worked with DAZN, and they do want to continue to work with DAZN in some capacity. You have Golden Boy over there. You have Frank Warren. You have Eddie Hearn. So all of the fighters are gravitating towards DAZN. To even Terrence Crawford is going to be on. It was on a DAZN card as well. He was on a Turki Al-Sheikh card as well, right? So what's left for these PBC fighters if everyone's going to be on DAZN and they're going to somehow, some way be affiliated with Turki Al-Sheikh, who seems to have the biggest piggy bank here, right? Where do the PBC fighters go? Because a lot of the PBC fighters have already jumped ship. A lot of them left, and a lot of them will continue to leave, right? So guys like David Benavidez, and we're going to talk about Tank Davis later, but guys like Benavidez, who's 27 years old, he's got a future to think about. Do I want to continue to hang around this dying, sinking ship, or do I want to kind of follow the money like everyone else is doing? So to answer your question, the future does not look bright for the PBC, and the future does not look bright long term for PBC fighters if they're looking for longevity and they're looking for consistency and they're looking to be active, right? Because when Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, Tank Davis, you can go down the list of PBC fighters. They're just not active, right? Subaru Matias, when he was over there, was not active. Now he's leaving, and he's in position to get to fight for a title. He lost his title, but now shortly thereafter, losing his title, he's going to be fighting for a title again. It looks like against a guy like Teofimo Lopez. So would that have happened if Subaru Matias was still on PBC? Possibly no. It's highly unlikely that it may not have happened, right? So this is a sinking ship that looks like it's continuing to sink. When you look at the fighters are just leaving in droves. So the future does not look bright for the PBC. And you know, we don't see any signs of positivity coming out of the PBC because where's the schedule? Right? Where's the schedule? Where are fights being shown that are not pay-per-view? How are you going to build somebody by putting them behind a pay-per-view wall and they're not really household names? So you're putting I love David. I love David and I like David Morrell. But why is that fight on pay-per-view?
$80. We saw a comment about it earlier. I'm going to highlight it right now.
Why is that fight on pay-per-view?
Melaza con Sabor says, why if I pay a subscription on DAZN or Amazon Prime, I had to pay $80 for a pay-per-view? F that. I'm not paying for pay-per-views anymore.
And I was talking about this before, and I think I talked to you about it as well. When you look at, obviously they're raising the pay-per-view prices, but if you watch a pay-per-view now, do you see how many advertisements they have on the pay-per-view now?
Yeah.
Like you used to watch a pay-per-view on Showtime pay-per-view. I used to watch it
commercial free.
Yeah, it was virtually commercial free. Once in a while, they would tell you something that they would had an upcoming series or something on the network, whether it be HBO or Showtime. But now you're seeing Riley's Auto Parts. You're seeing DraftKings. You're seeing all these advertisements. Like when you're watching it, you're being flooded by ads while you're watching these pay-per-views. So you know that they're trying to make the revenue up somewhere else. And I talked to Ring IQ about this. I talked to a lot of people about this, not only you. And we're seeing adjustments being made. So you know that they're looking for other ways to generate revenue through these fights, even with the pay-per-view model, because the pay-per-view model is continuing to fail. And we see so many people that are virtually on Twitter tweeting out and screenshotting pictures of their Fire Stick, telling you, we're not buying this anymore. We are not buying this anymore. So.
And this is my other thing. You follow the media reports. You get the press releases in your email box just like I do. Can you tell me how many fighters actually have an exclusive deal through their promoter with Amazon Prime?
I can't name one for you.
That's my point, and I'm you seems like you've come to the same conclusion.
Obviously, yeah.
So you've got Bivol, who's a Matchroom fighter. Matchroom has a deal with DAZN as its broadcaster. You've got Beterbiev, who's a Top Rank fighter. Top Rank has a promotional agreement with ESPN, at least for now until June. We've seen them be able to make cross-promotional, cross-broadcast arrangements between Matchroom and Top Rank and between DAZN and ESPN. I don't see any other option for these PBC fighters than to, in the future, sign on for major fights with fighters signed to either Top Rank or Matchroom. I don't see any other paths forward for either of these two guys, because if Beterbiev wins, you got to deal with Top Rank. If Bivol wins, you got to deal with Matchroom, right? Now, if Bivol wins, maybe they do a trilogy fight. I don't think Bivol is going to win, but if he wins, it's probably a trilogy fight. And then the question is, well, where does the winner of Morrell Jr. and David Benavidez go? I guess you could go rematch if it's a competitive fight. But if let's say it's not a competitive fight, one blows out the other, Bivol wins. Now there's a trilogy fight. Where do they go from there? Who else is there in the PBC stable, Joe? Go for it.
Nobody. That was my that was the point I was making before. It's like you're running out of options. You're running out of fighters. because the stable is shrinking, and everyone is going towards the zone. And I don't want to say the zone has a monopoly on boxing right now, but Turki Al-Sheikh, if you notice, and I know you're not going to like this what I'm about to say right now, because I know you do not like this entity, but Turki Al-Sheikh is somewhat turning boxing into the UFC to some degree, and I know you hate that,
Just to
but
be clear, it's the UFC I don't like. It's not Turkey or Riyadh season. Just to
no,
be
no,
clear.
no. That's what I'm saying. You don't like the UFC model because you're not a big fan of how Dana White runs the business over there, and I totally get the criticisms. I think the criticisms are warranted because um, Dana has all the leverage over those guys. Those guys have zero leverage, at least with guys like Canelo and guys like Fury, Joshua, big names in the sport of boxing. At least they can bargain a little bit.
He got rid of my friend Jacob Stitch Duran just for speaking out on behalf of fighters. I don't know if you know the
Sure,
story,
I
but
do. You told me this
but
several
but
times. Yeah,
basically, I'll tell the audience, the fighters in UFC at the time, a lot of them were making more off their sponsorships than they were off of their fight purses, and they sponsored various apparel or companies or whatever,
yeah.
and overnight they were notified that they could no longer wear anything other than I think it was Reebok at the time,
Mhm.
and their fight purses weren't really increasing. So fighters were really, in a bad place, and Stitch decided to give an interview where he spoke out on behalf of the fighters, just explaining that listen, they make money off their sponsorships and now they can't make any money off their sponsorships. Dana fired him as a
Yeah,
as a UFC cut man. He fired
yeah,
him. And it's
absolutely.
at that point that Stitch started working more in boxing than in MMA. He'd always worked in both, but he did a lot of MMA work
Yeah.
under the UFC, and he ended up going over the boxing. So then we also found out through various lawsuits and discovery. What's the name of the guy from the Bay Area? Kung Lee, I think was
Kung Lee, yeah, yeah.
spearheading it. We found out that they keep like over 80% of the revenues for themselves, which is literally the inverse of boxing.
And to Turki Al-Sheikh's credit, he's paying these fighters. It seems so. It's
Yes, he
not.
is.
It's not. I'm not making the comparison that it's an issue with the purse parity. That's not a problem. What I'm saying is he's kind of like controlling the schedule. In other words, he's making it so these fights are getting made, but because it's not like he's bullying these fighters, he's paying these fighters a lot of money to make them happen, but he still has somewhat of a control recently, right now, currently, over the sport because of his ability to make all these big fights. So he's the guy who's moving the chess pieces on the chessboard, right? But at least he's doing it in a better way. He's at least these guys are getting compensated for taking the risks. Where in the UFC, if you don't take the fight that they give you, you're on the shelf and you got nowhere to go. And if you sign for a fight and you end up getting hurt, automatically, according to Francis Ngannou, they add another fight to your contract.
Yeah.
So these are things that are
Yeah, I mean, you're injured, you can't fight. They give you a call. They tell you have to fight this guy. You're like, I'm injured. I can't fight him. We just renewed your contract for another year. Look
yeah,
at the fine print.
yeah.
So, but here's my question, and this will probably be my last question on this one, Joe. Talk to me about the influence of Turki Al-Sheikh in this situation with these four fighters.
It's all going to come down to money, just
Yeah,
like
I
I
mean,
said.
but
Yeah.
in terms of his influence, I would argue, I don't know how you feel about this, but I would argue that Turkey being involved in the sport and Turkey putting on a fight featuring David Morrell Jr. in LA last July, and the fact that he's doing the undisputed fight at 175 or did the undisputed fight and is doing the rematch, I think that increases the chance that that the winners of these two fights will face each other. I think it increases it. I don't know by how much, because of the Samson effect. And the Samson effect, you heard him say it. if one country doesn't stop doing what it's doing with another country, then David won't fight guys from that country. So, my last question is this: you've got the Samson effect and the Turkey effect. Which one do you think wins out?
Well, here's the thing with Tank Davis, and I'm kind of gonna sway off path a little bit here, but I'm gonna tie it all together. I'm gonna land the plane, but just I'm gonna do as Trump says. I'm gonna weave a little bit, right? So with the situation with Tank Davis, he has that big fight with Ryan Garcia, right, under his belt, where he got paid in excess of 20, 25, some people say $30 million, right? So he can always say, well, I don't need this guy. Look what I did without him. Problem is with David, both Davids, obviously, they don't have that in their back pocket. They can't say that, right? So that's another positive sign, right? If a suitcase of money gets dropped on either one of these fighters' laps, whoever wins the fight, right? Now, even with the Samson effect, because this guy Samson can fuck up a free lunch. He really can. I've talked to the guy on the phone. I don't have a disdain for this guy, but I don't trust him. I'm just gonna come out and say,
I mean,
that.
he
Like,
lied to you directly.
He's lied to me several times.
Yeah.
He's misled me several times, and not that he owes me anything. I mean, I'm nobody. I'm not saying he owes me anything. What I'm saying is, from my own personal experience with the guy, I personally don't trust him. You can say, "Well, Beeb, who are you? Who cares? We don't." Your opinion is those are all true statements. But what I'm saying is, this is an opinion show, and I'm giving my opinion. I don't trust the guy. I think he's hurt David's career. David's made a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but in my opinion, David could have probably made a lot more money than he's made already. Well, who are you? What are you? You're not in the business. Okay, just because you're not in the business, and just because you're in the business, doesn't mean you know the business. How many times have we heard fighters say, like Deontay Wilder, "Well, I turned down the Joshua fight for more money, and I fought Fury instead." And at that time, when hindsight is 2020, we could play the woulda, coulda, shouldas. At that time, in my opinion, I said to myself, why would you not taking the Fury fight for less money? Which, in my opinion, and it turned out to be right. Not that I'm Nostradamus or anything, but it turned out to be right that you took the harder fight for less money. And not that Joshua was an easy fight, but in my opinion, style-wise, it was an easier fight than Fury at the time, right? Because at that time, everyone was saying, well, it was 50-50 on who would win, Wilder or Joshua, because at the time, Wilder was just knocking everyone out. And there was questions about Joshua at the time, too, his chin or durability or his mental stability, whatever the case may be. And all those things kind of made the fight even, right? And a lot of people, myself included at that time, thought Wilder would knock out Joshua. Right? So this is why, you can make a lot of money, but still also leave a lot of money on the table and then make a move that hurts you in the long run. You could get a short-term benefit, but also have a long-term negative unintended consequences, which in that case, I believe that second Fury fight took a lot out of Wilder. You can say that ruined him, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Joshua has been prone to get hit with right hands, and obviously in boxing you get hit, but Joshua gets hit with right hands a lot. He got knocked out by a right hand against Daniel Dubois. He was being tagged with right hands, against Joseph Parker, right? Against Alexander Povetkin. He's prone, and Vladimir Klitschko knocked him down with a big right hand. So what's Deontay Wilder's greatest weapon? The right hand. So to sit there and say that he's never going to land that punch when everyone else landed that punch against Joshua, and you could make a lot of money, and obviously you can sit there and say, well, who do you know? Look how much money these guys made. Yeah, but you can also look at it and say, well, how much money did they actually leave on the table? How did they take years off their career by making the wrong move at the wrong time? So just because you're in the business doesn't mean you know the business. I've had a lot of people tell me that, who are you? You're just a fan, whatever. But again, I don't think I'm a stupid person. I think at the time when I said that him turning down that Joshua fight and taking the Fury rematch when Joshua had all the titles. Fury wasn't even a champion at the time. You could have become undisputed. You could have become undisputed and made more money, and you took a fight with Fury, who wasn't even a champion at the time, for less money. Was that the right move? I don't think so. So again, these are all PBC moves, right? These are all situations that I think where PBC doesn't really put the best interest in the fighter. I think a lot of the issues that the PBC has with other promoters and other organizations, a lot of that is personal, and I think it bleeds into the fighter, and the fighter has to suffer the consequences for that. They convinced Tank all along, Al Heyman, to just keep doing what he's doing, and as a result of that, Tank made a lot of money, but people question the legacy. And when people question the legacy, he gets all upset about it. You got to make a decision. You either make the money, or you can make the money and also increase the legacy. Right now, you just made the money. The legacy is always going to be in question right now because you haven't fought those names.
Absolutely. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about part 2, guys. Part 2 is going to be on my channel. We're going to be talking about Tank Davis 2025. Is he finished? And what is his legacy in the sport? How do you guys have him? Because I was listening to a show yesterday, Talk Sport, new pundit, Duke McKenzie, the former world champion Duke McKenzie. He has Tank Davis is his number 1 pound for pound fighter in the sport. The Ring Magazine is ranking him as a top 10 pound for pound fighter. So we're going to talk about that. And what does it mean if he retires now or retires after 2025 after a Lamont Roach fight? Is this guy a Hall of Famer? How do you rate his career?
Well,
What have the effects of Floyd Mayweather been on Tank Davis and on his legacy? We're going to be talking about this and a lot more. But before you go, Joe, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification buttons, everyone. Invite people over to the channel, invite people over to the party here. Great boxing talk as always when it comes to Joe Habib, Ringside Reporter Live. Flagship show with Eric Lorda, 6 p.m. Eastern Sundays. That's 3 p.m. Pacific. That's 11 p.m. London, UK time. Go for it, Joe.
yeah, I think that with Tank Davis, David Benavidez, I think we have a lot of question marks with PBC, and I don't even know how long that deal is with Amazon Prime. And could this be the year that PBC maybe falls by the wayside? Maybe Amazon Prime decides, you know what, this could be the last year. We're not going to extend our services to you guys. Will this be another deal that so-called blows up in PBC's face? See what happens. I don't like to see any entity go out of business. I don't root for anybody to fail, but I will tell you this.
We were rooting for them to succeed in 2025
I
or
will tell you,
2024. We were in the group saying this Amazon thing is potentially a good deal. They're going to be doing all these shows. I ended up with egg on my face, looking like a fool. Saying,
yeah, I mean, I was the same because I'm an optimistic guy, man. I've always tried to be optimistic, So if you throw me out of a 60-story building, I'm on the way down. I'm thinking I'll be okay because there's a a trampoline underneath me to save to break my fall, right? But in this case, they did it to themselves. And as I was gonna say, if they were to go out of business, I wouldn't shed any tears for them because I think ultimately it would be better for a lot of these fighters, and because they could go somewhere else where they'd become more active and they could sharpen their skills and hone their craft and move on with their career in a positive way, which I don't see happening with PBC right now. So I think if David Benavidez continues to work with PBC and not explore other options, I think in the long run it's not going to be great for his career, in my opinion. And I'm not saying David Benavidez had a bad career, but I just think that he could have made more money and he could have had bigger fights if he was with somebody else.
Yep. And on that note, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button. Make sure you tune in to Ringside Reporter Live every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. UK time, London time. All right. And we'll see you for part 2. We're going to be talking about Tank Davis 2025 and looking at his legacy, looking at how things stand for him right now in the sport of boxing. Any last words, Joe?
I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll see you soon, and enjoy your Saturday and your the beginning of 2025. Take care, everyone.